Reviewed by the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, NSFAS. While students are calling for free education, NSFAS has been struggling to give loans to all the poor students who need it and are eligible. Well, a year ago, Sizwe Nxasana was appointed as chair when he was the outgoing Firstrand CEO, and he's agreed to join us in studio now. Thank you for joining us, Sizwe.
Pleasure.
So you came in, and that was one of the challenges, NSFAS not even having the funds to help the poor who needed it. So then how do you look over now at the general call for free education and immediately?
Well, there are a couple of facts that we need to share with the public. The first one is that the NSFAS financial assistance is not just a loan. And in fact, 70% of the funds that we are administering this year, the total about 17 billion rand or so, are actually bursaries. In other words, it's only 30%, and obviously I'm talking about here university student funding as well as TVET college funding. As far as the university student funding is concerned, 40% is actually bursaries.
Is this, can you explain, is this for students who complete their 3-year, I think, and then the last year is converted into a bursary, or is it even better than that?
No, it's even better than that, because 40% in the first year of study is actually converted into a bursary if the student passes a certain number of modules. The same applies to second year, and if they pass the final year, 100% of the final year costs are actually converted into a bursary. So if you look at where we are today, last year, the total allocation by government to NSFAS amounted to some 10 billion rand. This year, it's about 17 billion rand. So about a 70% increase in the funding allocation that's coming to NSFAS today. And if you look at the announcements and the decisions that we've made this year, in fact, no NSFAS qualifying student at university or TVET college should have been turned away. That decision was made earlier this year. So if you qualify and you come from a family with an income of up to 122,000 rand, you should have been funded in fact, fully funded in terms of the cap that NSFAS uses. So often, those facts are lost, and we talk about loans. It's not everything that is a loan. TVET college students are already getting fee-free education, and university students, at least to the extent of about 40%, are actually getting bursaries.
So this is good news. What about the claim that NSFAS is owed a lot of cash and really struggles to bring that money in? How much are you owed at this point?
Well, the total fair value of the loan book is sitting at about just over almost 7 billion rand. And obviously there are recoveries. We already struck a deal, and we're working very closely with the South African Revenue Services, who are now providing information to be able to recover the outstanding loans. We've done a whole lot of work in terms of cleaning up our records so that we can identify exactly where people are. So we're already starting to see increase in the recoveries that we're getting from people.
Okay, so NSFAS doing better, that's the basic message. My first question was then, look over at Fees Must Fall, the call for free education. You, I understand, have been part of these discussions with the Minister, Bladen Zimande, and you obviously are aware of all the ideas being bounced around at the moment. What's your personal view?
Well, my personal view is this. There's a personal view, there's also a view of my being chairman of the ministerial task team that's been looking at a solution of how and whether we can give fee-free education to the poor, as well as subsidized education to children or students that come from working class backgrounds.
The missing middle.
The so-called missing middle. So I presented a report to the minister with all the recommendations that actually demonstrate that it is feasible and possible to offer fee-free education to those students that are poor. Obviously, we need to define what poor means, but also by mobilizing funding not only from the state, but also from other sources, including the private sector, we can, as a country, afford to provide funding as well as support, because funding is only one part of the equation. There's a lot of support, for instance, to stop the leakage and the dropout rates that are quite high for especially students that come from poor backgrounds and working class backgrounds. So we actually have an integrated proposal which is supported by the private sector. We've been working and consulting with government and other stakeholders including Universities SA, to come up with what we believe is a workable solution here. So, and we're going to be running a pilot next year. the pilot is actually going to be funded almost fully by the private sector. So sometimes, it's as if there are no solutions that are being looked at. The solutions are being looked at, and all the parties are working really hard to try and find solutions to the current challenges.
Okay, so this is interesting. Was this one of the things discussed yesterday? Is it a relatively new proposal? And you said businesses involved. Just give me names. Who is behind this?
Well, just to give you an example. So when I was appointed as the member and chair of the ministerial task team at the end of April, we then mobilized the banking sector, the insurance sector. So the Banking Association, the Association for Investment and Savings is involved. We have, Weber Wenzel that's been involved in looking at all the legislative and public policy issues that are affected. The South African Institute of Chartered Accountants, and all of these entities, private sector, actually working for nothing, allocating huge amount of resources and time to developing solutions, clearly working with government as well as consulting with all the other stakeholders.
So this solution, does it lead to free education for the poor and the missing middle, and by what timeline?
Well, I must make it clear that as far as the missing middle is concerned, there's a combination of expected family contribution depending on the means test. Like for instance, for students that come from households that go up to about 600,000 rand, there'll be a combination of a contribution from a family, a subsidy or grant, and a loan. So it's a combination of those solutions to make it possible that we are funding, in all of those cases, that would be qualifying the full cost of study. In other words, registration, tuition, books, accommodation, meals, and even a stipend. So it's a holistic solution. However, I think it is important to indicate that to offer the solution across all of the 26 public universities as well as the TVET colleges is going to cost a lot of money. The numbers that we have actually crunched range from, depending on the number of students that are going to be funded, if we're funding, say, 50% of the 813,000 students that are in universities pursuing degrees, diplomas, and certificates, that number is about 37 billion rand. If we're going to fund 90% of the students that are in the universities pursuing those programs, the number is about 68 billion rand. And we've looked at various scenarios in terms of how it may be feasible to actually achieve this, especially given that the government has fiscal constraints, and therefore government at the moment, is doing its best to do its bit, but we've got to try and mobilize all of the other funding sources to be able to address the issue.
Okay, so where do you take from? Because that is the argument. There's health, there's a primary school education, there's a whole lot of different pressures on the fiscus. Where do you take the money from?
Well, you actually don't take money from especially not from other social services, but what you do, one, you stop the leakage that exists sometimes, even in the funding of students, because you find that there's national government, provincial government, CETAs, as well as local government, all sort of funding in a very uncoordinated way. The same applies to the private sector, by the way. There's a lot of leakage that happens in the system. So by just stopping the leakage, we can actually fund more students. Secondly, it's about finding better ways of how you can raise money. So there is money in the private sector, there's money in NGOs and philanthropists, both domestically as well as internationally. So we've looked at various sources of funding pools, both domestically as well as overseas, and we believe that we can at least the idea, obviously subject to various approvals and some legislative changes that are going to have to be made, that we can move towards introducing this model in 2018.
Okay, so that's pretty soon.
Pretty much.
And how does NSFAS fit in? A proposal from WIT said, NSFAS should be used itself to fund first-year students. Will this all be enveloped into that bursary for most of the poor and some of the missing middle? Well,
the proposals that we have are integrated. In other words, they look at the existing funding sources as well as the support that currently exists for all students, including TVET college students and university students, as well as looking at how we can raise alternative funding and then deal with some of the issues, such as, for instance, how do we reduce the dropout rates that are quite high, especially for students that are funded by NSFAS at the moment? How do we make sure that we create a robust platform to be able to run the operations efficiently? How do we make sure that we can improve recoveries for particularly the loan component, to the extent that there will be loans in some of the funding structures that we're going to have, as I indicated earlier. So it's a holistic solution that also looks at, how do we leverage and raise funding to build capacity and infrastructure for universities, especially historically black universities that may not have capacity to support students and give them additional academic support, psychosocial support, and so on, which is quite important in improving the rates of success.
I wish we could continue. Thank you so much, Sizwe Nxasana, from the Educational Aid Scheme NSFAS, and I'm sure that we'll hear more about that proposal as the details are unpacked, as everybody adds their voice to how we solve this crisis. But unfortunately, we have to stop there. Let's look at the numbers.